Greetings, historians. Welcome to Lore of the Dragon. Over the last few months, I've been reading a fair amount of books, mainly in practicing for my own writing and projects. And while I had read it a few years back, when I was looking for things to read, Wings of Fire was recommended to me by a few friends. And after reading it and seeing some viewers are quite into this over the years, I thought it'd be a nice treat to start talking about the series. This will be by design a video that's really just talking about a few aspects of world building and lore going into the series. And since this is going to be at the beginning of the series, I'm going to try to keep this spoiler free for the other parts of it, like Act 2 and 3. So people who haven't been reading this despite it being out since the mid-10s can still savor the experience of the first few books and following those. I did originally cover the third arc of this series, but because of my previous statement, I didn't really think it was good to talk about it, at least not right now. If you wanted me to, I could make another video, but I do want to see how this video does first. For now though, I'll be delving into the continent of Pyria. Pyria is a landscape dominated by dragons and other wildlife found across its landscape, with the dragons being the most technologically advanced and powerful species. They engage in geopolitics, host their own cultures, and so on. These dragons are broken up into tribes, or in the political form, kingdoms, which rule over environments that seem to be best suited for them. Thus, the continent is diverse, with vast tundras to sprawling deserts and swamps. There are even sprawling underwater castles made by the aptly named Sea Wings, aquatic dragons of whom occupy probably the most unique location and niche within the draconic world. But what about the history of this world? In the past, there was an event referred to as the Scorching, which took place some 5,012 years before the beginning of the first book. Thus, years are referred to as AS, or After Scorching. In the year of 5012, we find that there is a civil war that dominates the political sphere of Pyria. This war took place upon the death of one Queen Oasis, caused by three sisters and daughters of the Queen, Burn, Blister, and Blaze. Following them into battle would be their subjects and their allies, split between the sisters to bring an all-out war to the continent. This would continue for 20 years, with an end only being seen in a prophecy of 5 young dragons. The dragons themselves can take on various abilities and attributes. Some breathe fire, some do not, some are even rumored to see future possibilities. The kingdoms of which the tribes inhabit are ruled by long-standing monarchies, where a queen is challenged by her daughters for the claim to the throne. This usually happens when a dragonet, a term used for their young, becomes strong enough to challenge their mother, which could happen before the age of 7 when they're considered adults, or later. Whether or not they were ready for such a challenge whenever they decided to have it is another story. The sons of the queen are barred from becoming rulers of the tribes, it seems, although princes still hold some power within their respective kingdoms. Sometimes they won't have any tasks, as they're too young to really hold any, or some will be in the militaries of their particular kingdom. There are kings in reference to husbands of the queen, but it is the queen that seems to be the head of state. It's also been observed that these dragons may have an affinity toward hoarding treasure like that of old mythology, and seems to be something instinctual to these dragons, though that's only been seen once, if I recall correctly. Moving on to how they name themselves, the names of these tribes and kingdoms derive from the land or territory, and in the case of the tribes themselves, the people, they will refer to themselves as something like Icewing, which is in reference to a tribe that lives up in the frozen north. One, because of their abilities and appearances, but also for where they live. And to save me the time of explaining how the dragons will name themselves, as in their actual given names, the naming conventions of these dragons are similar across all the tribes to some degree, with each one having their own differing themes and intricacies behind them. The 5 young dragons mentioned earlier actually are a pretty good example, with some being named things like Tsunami for them being from the ocean, or for one being referred to as Sunny because they come from the desert. It's sort of a naming convention like that. But what of the tribes? What are their exact differences? We'll start out with the tribe that is probably the most quintessential tribe to the story of the first arc, and whose actions reciprocated through the rest of the series. The Sandwings, fire breathers, the desert dwellers of Pyria, plunged it into a war between the 3 sisters Burn, Blister, and Blaze. Daughters of Queen Oasis, they divided their homeland between themselves upon the death of their mother, who was slain by the hands of what are referred to as scavengers. As their mother died before they could claim the throne, the 3 sisters and their followers began the civil war to claim it, starting what would become known as the Great War, or the War of Sandwing Succession. Physically, it's not only their fire-breathing abilities that make them dangerous, but also scorpion-like stingers on the end of their tail. How this was brought into their biology is not covered, but it must have to do something with their environment, just as their scales and most likely their physiology have adapted to the vast desert they inhabit. This has turned their scales into various shades of, quote, pale gold or white scales, end quote, lending themselves to be well camouflaged in the dunes of their home. Of course, physically, they're also able to endure the heat of their habitat, perhaps because of their scales or some other trait that they possess. And this, coupled with requiring less water than the average dragon, makes them all the more well suited for living in basically a giant desert. Culturally, they're pretty hard set in the whole monarchy thing, as most, if not all, the tribes are. But as for their core culture, the culture of the people, one must take into account 20 years of conflict in this land. So most Sandwings have generally gone to being mercenaries and assassins, if not part of the 3 armies that fought for control of the dunes. Moving on from the Sandwings and traveling to the frozen coasts of Pyria, we find the Icewings, the strangely blue-blooded dragons of the north. Coming from such an environment, they've adapted scales ranging in color from a sort of silver to white, with hints of blue or purple at times marking their scales. Sharp horns and tail blades accompany the motif of ice shards and glaciers. Markings like speckles can appear on their scales, but most likely one would see a solid white icewing with some hints of blue. As their name also implies, instead of breathing fire, they breathe white and or blue ice. Being from the frozen north, Icewings are rather thin dragons who feed themselves with seals or other raw meats. In fact, hunting for a meal is, I believe, part of their culture, at least to some degree, though seals are generally eaten more by the lower classes. But other more elaborate treats eventually made their way to the Ice Kingdom. Before the end of the war, Queen Glacier ruled the Icewings, and the reason for joining the war was to get more territory in the northern parts of the Sand Kingdom, promised to them by Princess Blaze of the Sandwings. Moving on, Mudwings, a tribe of fire breathers who adorn orange and browns on their armored scales, are those who live in the marshes and wetlands of Pyria. They've adapted to becoming something similar to crocodiles, being able to hold their breath for hours underwater, along with other rare traits which might be a little spoiler heavy for what this video is. They, like another tribe that will be brought up later, are seen as rather lazy, or some say dumb, when compared to the other tribes for their affinity toward mud and eating, and also just being big, burly dragons, I guess. However, at least for their affinity toward eating, this seems to have led to the creation of cuisines such as ice cream, coming from cattle they, I assume, raise on farms, if they haven't eaten the cattle already. And yes, I imagine there might be some people wondering how dragons can even process milk and why they would have ice cream if they're not mammals. So, you know what? Let's just accept this. Just universally accept this. Ruled by Queen Morhen, in the current year that they are in, they were on the side of Burn. Culturally, their society holds to a strong sense of sibling camaraderie, with even their army comprised of the troops of siblings rather than what are generally accepted, which is sort of just randomly selected people to be part of a unit. These troops are divided into various roles, such as healers, treasurers, gatherers, and communicators, and who are led by an elder sibling, commonly referred to as their bigwings. And this is something that I believe also goes into more civilian life, but it is carried into military life as well. Like that of the Sandwings, they had gone through their own succession crisis with no heirs that were available to take the place of their queen. Though this seems to have not resulted in the conflict like that of what befell the Sandwings. And this happened, I'm not entirely sure, but it happened a while before the War of Sandwing succession. In the mountains of Pyria are the Skywings, red, orange, copper-breathing fire dragons with large wingspans, which makes them perhaps the fastest flyers in this world. And leading them at the time was Queen Scarlet, and were allied to Byrne in the war. Skywings themselves seem to enjoy various types of entertainment, mainly through an arena or other physically taxing activities, such as the Clash of Claws tournament, which is an endurance test of both flame and body. This, traditionally, would take place over 7 days, with 7 years between each event, changing in meaning from the reign of the previous queen, Queen Firestorm, to the queen of that day, Queen Scarlet. Yet before this, they seemed to be a tribe which held an affinity toward works of art, something that seems to have been lost in the recent regime. Historically, they were also said to have small skirmishes with other tribes, such as the Icewings and Sandwings, just to show that there are other conflicts before the War of Sandwing succession. There are also interesting physical attributes they can take on, mainly that of something called fire scales, which I won't explain here because it's, again, a little spoilery, but if you want to hear about it, maybe I can make a video about it at some point. The Sea Wings are ruled by Queen Coral, a queen who seems to spend her free time writing anything and everything the Sea Wings read, reaching into tales of how their tribe will end the War of Sandwing succession, and things like that. They reside mainly in the waters of the eastern coasts and bay of Pyria, thanks to their unique ability to breathe underwater and also having webbed talons to traverse the ocean depths with ease. While these blue or green dragons lack the ability to breathe fire, this unique strength of being able to live in the seas makes them worthy adversaries and perhaps very hard to actually wage war against. Moving on from the Sea Wings, Rain Wings are the other tribe that most consider to be rather lazy. Most don't really bother going into the jungle, however, and they haven't really bothered to come out, given the fact that at that time they weren't involved in the war at all. However, the only other information about them that I'll put here is that their queen is known as Queen Dazzling. And finally, we get to a rather elusive tribe, perhaps the most elusive outside of maybe the Rain Wings as of the first book, the Night Wings. Dragons of black scales which can be accented with dark green, blue, purple, and gray. While like most dragons, they can breathe fire, they are rumored to also have things such as mind reading and future sight, meaning that for many, there is no secret that is safe as far as the Nightwings are concerned. Their stories are long, dotted with individuals of immense power and knowledge. And outside of what Queen Coral might give to the Sea Wings, most of what we know about the literature is written by them, including, at the beginning of the books, the very guide to the dragons. There is also the case of the Scavengers, another species. However, I will leave them for either another video if you want me to make one, or if you decide to actually read the books, you can go find out who they are for yourself. So, this video was a little weird to cover, with the books already having their own guide to the dragons in the very first pages. I've tried to include some extra bits of lore that I could find either from the books directly that weren't really spoiler heavy, or from the guidebook that came out late last year. Hopefully this video overall added something to the conversation in Wings of Fire, but I'll have to think about how I'll approach future videos and their topics. If this does well, there might be some more book related content on the channel as well, Just let me know how you like this non-Spyro content, because I'm kind of returning to it just to get away from the same sort of song and dance that I've usually been going through. It was quite interesting to try, just I don't know how other people feel about it, so let me know. With all that being said, we'll end the video here and roll the Patreon credits. A big thank you to my Patreons, Abyssal Blue, ConquerFan91, Eric Emanuel, Jabby, Kiasu Shin, Wazi Nightmare Spyro, and Shaggy. I'll see you all the next time we talk. Stay safe, historians.